Hello everyone, George DeSantis here with a look at the market for the week ending March 16, 2018. As many of you know, I've been recovering from surgery for the past couple of weeks, so I haven't done this. I haven't really paid much attention to the market itself. Um, Before we begin, let's put up the disclaimer. You should read it because it will indicate that this is not investment advice. I am not an investment advisor. I simply do this for my own edification and share it with others who are inclined to take a look at it. So we'll begin to look at some of the charts, such as the weekly chart of the S&P 500, as we usually do. Let me remind you that we start off by looking at the indices, especially the S&P, and and then we look at some individual stocks. So let's do that. So let's start as we usually do with a weekly chart of the S&P 500. Um, Sometime about a week and a half ago, I sent you an email with the S&P showing a triangle, which is what we have here. It was especially prominent on the daily chart, but you can see it also showing here on the weekly chart. The A, B, C, there isn't quite a point touching this line of a triangle here that we can label D yet, but we do have the development of an ABCD triangle going on. Some people will say that we have a coiled spring, and it keeps getting tighter and tighter. Sooner or later, this should explode to this one side or the other, up or down. So we'll see how that looks on the daily chart as we move to it. However, before we leave the weekly chart, notice the parabolic is still above the most recent bar. So there's still some weakness shown here insofar as the weekly chart is concerned. Now we do have the 4 EMA above the 9 and the 9 above the 30. That's the yellow, red, and green lines. So insofar as moving averages are concerned, we still have a nice uptrend. So on the RSI 12, we can see it dropped below 60% recently, but RSI 12 is still above 40. So I don't believe that the uptrend is really threatened as yet. Now looking at RSI at Williams percent R, a 30 period, you can see that it did drop below the 50% line here temporarily, 1 week, this week here, this one. But since then it's recovered and it's above the 50% line. And you've heard me say many times, I like to use the 50% line as sort of a line in the sand. As long as it holds above the 50% line, I feel pretty good about holding stocks that are trending up, of course. MACD is in bearish territory, but the bears seem to be getting a little weaker here than they were over here. So we'll see how that develops. And lastly, at the bottom of the chart, I've plotted, I wrote the formula in here for Jerry Appel's sum of the rate of change indicator that he writes about in one of his books. So I copied, I wrote in the formula here. And you can see that it briefly touched the 4% line a couple of times here, once here and once here. But since then, it's been staying above the 4% line. So I would say this is setting up for a nice move up. Insofar as the weekly chart is concerned, I believe steady as she goes, and we're going to get a nice breakout here sometime soon. Let's take a look at the daily chart. Now this is the daily chart of the S&P 500, and a couple of things to notice. Insofar as moving averages are concerned, it's difficult to tell where the 9 EMA is and the 50 moving average. They're both sort of running along each other here, along on top of each other. So the 4 is above the 9 is above the 30. As far as moving averages are concerned, we're in an uptrend. And in fact, we might even add the 50 moving average, which shows us price is right there. It's right on the 50. Now, parabolic is below the most recent bars, so there's no indication to reverse this recent uptrend here on the daily chart. Another thing to notice is that although the Bollinger Bands were very, very far apart here, now they're coming together. So we're going into this classic squeeze situation. And we know that once these squeezes develop, the market usually explodes to the upside or the downside. It really is difficult, and you really can't tell exactly what side it will move to, whether it will ride the Bollinger up to the top or ride it down. But we have to wait and see how that is determined. Now, so far as the other indicators are concerned, RSI 12 is above the 40% line. It's touching the 60. Williams percent R above 50%. MACD is in bullish territory. And Jerry Appel's sum of the rate of change indicator is slightly above the 4% line. So I would sum it up by saying that the S&P is looking to break out to the break out one way or the other, up or down, based on the squeeze of the Bollinger Band and the triangle. So we have that indication there that the market is likely to explode one way or the other. I will bet on the upside based on some of the other indicators. Let's take a look at some individual stocks. And before we turn to the individual stocks, I forgot to include this. Let's take a look at the best choice chart. You can see that the S&P was very, very overbought here, right? In late, January. And then that's when it collapsed. And it's working its way back up, but it's still in oversold territory. It's now in oversold, it's still remaining in oversold territory, and the extreme rating is 20%. So we have a ways to go to the 90% level where it becomes overbought again. So I would say this is also favorable insofar as the general market is concerned. Let's turn to the individual stocks. So I'm going to go through a list of individual stocks. First, I'm going to show you the weekly charts, then the dailies, and then I'm going to go to best choice and see if these stocks are overbought, oversold, and to what extent they are either overbought or oversold. We'll see where they line up right now. So starting with Apple, this is the weekly chart. We can see the 4 is above the 9 EMA, the 9 EMA is above the 30. So moving averages tell us we're in an uptrend, parabolic below the most recent bar, we're in an uptrend. The other indicators are supporting that. We have MACDs trending up from below the zero line. Williams percent R is now above 60%, and RSI 12 is above the 40% line. So on the weekly chart, we have Apple looking very good. On the daily chart, you can see that after it made this low here with a hammer, it started moving up again. And it got to the upper Bollinger Band. You can see that squeeze occurring, just as we saw in the S&P. And so we might expect a move one way or the other. Why should I expect Apple to go down? So I would expect it to go up from here. So if you don't own it, it may be a good opportunity to either buy calls or buy the stock or whatever, but go bullish on it, RSI 12 above 40%, and Williams percent R and is looking bullish. MACD looking bullish. I want to cover quite a few stocks, so I'm not going to spend much time on all the other indicators here, except if we see some aberration like a divergence. So let's take a look at something else. So here's the best choice chart on Apple, and you'll see that it's at about 50%, so it has room at the top. And if you're interested in that, in order to if and when it gets to the 90% line, it would be at $185 or $186. That's 186. You have to do it this way, 186.96. So there's some room at the top here for Apple to move another 5 or 6 points. Next stock. Here's Facebook, the weekly chart. Facebook's been in a consolidation period for quite a while, and it's still there. Reasons I'm not quite sure. However, we might expect that since the government has put some pressure on them concerning the hacking, etc., that's depressed the stock a bit, stock price. So, but the weekly chart is still trending up. 9 above, the 4 is above the 9, 9 above 30. And on the other hand, we have parabolic above the most recent bar. So it's in that tight range here and probably not going anywhere for a little while. Let's move to something else. Here's Facebook. We're going to take a look at the overbought, oversold chart, the regression channel. You can see it's just smack in the middle. It's at 52%. So there's room to the upside, room to the downside. It's in that trading range that we saw on the other charts. There's Netflix. If you've been following it, you know that Netflix has had a great move already this year, from January all the way up here. But it's been riding the upper Bollinger Band, and now it seemed to have been consolidating in the last week or so. Perhaps it will come back a little more and give a better buying opportunity. But Netflix is one of those stocks that has tremendous momentum. Here's the best choice chart. So you can see that it is riding the 90% line here. Somewhat quite overbought actually. It's at the extreme line of 86% now. So don't be surprised to see Netflix pull back a bit toward the 50% line, which would be about 300, and then move up again. Here's another mover, Adobe. Adobe has some interesting contracts with Microsoft and Google and others for their cloud activities. And so look at Adobe rather. Adobe has been, look at this, nice looking chart. Wow, it's exploded to the upside, and there doesn't seem to be any resistance up here at all. So Adobe just declared earnings, and they seem to be doing quite well. If it probably is overbought, but we'll take a look and see here. Adobe. It's got to be. Yeah, it is overbought. It's at 85.5%. Sometimes it remains there for a little while, but that's where Adobe is right now. Let's look at something else. Here's Visa. You know, this is one of my favorites. Nice, steady uptrend, right? And you can see that triangle, probably getting ready to break out of that triangle. Parabolic is seemingly going to be hit, or it is hit by this bar here, so that parabolic will soon go below the next bar. So I like Visa a lot, as you know. And if we look at the best choice chart, we can see that Visa is only at the 42% extreme line, so it has room at the top. In fact, if you're interested, 128 would be the 90% line, 128.36. See there? The high of 128.36 would be this line here. So Visa has a ways to go. Here's NVIDIA, a weekly chart. You can see that this thing has had one explosive move here in the last couple of years anyway. And right now it's continuing to go up. The 4 is above the 9, 9 above 30. Parabolic is bullish here. So NVIDIA is one of those stocks that is still continuing to move. And if you look at the best choice chart, we can see it's at 62%. So there's even some room at the top right now, all the way up to 263.64 to get to the 90% line. It would be at 263.64, I think it is what we said. Yeah, 263.64. Here's Align Technology. Some time ago, I told you I bought some 250 calls. Well, I sold them recently for a nice gain. I think I paid 240 for the call, and I sold them somewhat above $10. So it was a nice move. It went up even more than that, so I sold too soon as usual. I also sent you a little note on Costco. I was going to buy it. I did buy it. I bought it off this triangle, and just so you know that these triangles and all these indications don't always work out the way we expect them to. Therefore, I had a loss on Costco. I did sell it somewhere here, just very, very recently. We've exhausted our 15-minute allotted time, so have a great weekend. We'll try to do this